Welcome back. Today we are going to be taking a look and doing a rundown of Dev Diary 66, which outlines some of the new things that are going to be coming in patch 1.1. I was a little disappointed when I first read this because the things that I really wanted to see in the second part of patch 1.1, what they're telling us they're giving us, is I was excited for warfare and diplomacy, but according to them, 1.1 is going to primarily focus on bug fixing, balancing AI, and improvements in UI UX work. This is actually probably the biggest thing in terms of right now. I just feel like I can't recommend the game to my friends because the UI is very, very opaque and it's difficult to try and get a hold of, even though the game's really interesting. And so maybe after this patch, I would recommend it to friends. We'll see what it looks like. Certainly, like some of in the part one of the patch, we talked about like how what your pops consumptions are is going to be changed in this patch, and I think that's a big one. Okay. But looks like next free patch, notably, they're going to focus on warfare and diplomacy. They're pretty hot. And then hotfix 1.06 should help you with performance improvements. I've noticed this for the later game. Performance seems to be considerably better. Okay, the thing they're telling us about primarily today that they are doing is not like a whole bunch of like minor bug fixes or whatever, but instead they're talking about world discoverable oil. And I don't know if you played it towards late game, but there's not enough oil on the map. You can open up and we can take a look here. This is all the discoverable oil. And that's not much of a zoom. And currently, even if you prioritize grabbing oil fields in your runs, it's still incredibly hard to keep up with later PMs that use oil. I think I did an Egypt run where I grabbed all of the Middle Eastern oil, including Tripoli and Azerbaijan. And I think maybe this oil field up here, kind of the southern bit of Russia, a little north of the Caucasus, and also all the Indonesian oil. And I still couldn't like keep up with any PMs that were really late, and I had to roll everything back. I was using hydropower, and the only thing I was using oil for was for the things where there's no way to produce it except with oils, like automobiles and planes. And it was not. It does not feel like accurate, even though I'm like prioritizing picking up the oil on the map, and then also the AI like did a poor job like actually harvesting the oil, and so like okay, in the version of the game you are currently playing, all these oil reserves are. These are the oil reserves discoverable in the game. They are mostly historical oil fields that were cultivated over the current knowledge of where oil is and has been accessible, even if we did not find out later until 1936. Also, you've no doubt noticed in your games, oil is a scarce resource and limits the progression of later game industrialization. Yes, yes, yes. While we want it to be an important late game resource, I agree with this, its current bottleneck as an available resource is a little too harsh to the player experience, so we've expanded discoverable oil fields in games. So this is the new oil fields, and you can see there's a lot more discoverables. Still, it seems like the early oil fields are still the big ones. So if you look, there's a 30 in Tripoli, there's a 60. Well, the 60 here wasn't here before, but there was a 60 in Bahrain. That's like difficult to see. And so it still seems that the biggest oil fields are still the biggest. You know, the smattering of fives isn't a lot of oil, but it's enough to like use some of the PMs that you want to use and like do like a little bit of production of some of the stuff, even if it's not huge. But this is a huge expansion of oil fields, and so it's going to be much more plentiful. I know what some of you might be asking. Why not just increase the production methods, oil methods, and leave the historical oil fields in place? Well, why have you included specific oil fields that were not tapped until much later? Those fields represent either usage of either oil sands or some very substrate that would have not been accessible at the time. So here's going to talk about like a balance type thing. Oil production methods are already incredibly profitable, and buffing them further would probably not help fully solve the problem. The gating of late game oil fields to only historically extracted areas is always tricky. If Russia and the United States collapse in the game, 50+% of the world's oil supply is locked behind their regression and the world suffers. So I actually think this is a huge reason for doing what they did, or to me this seems like a very, very good reason for not just increasing the supply where it already is. I kind of like spreading it out a little bit, but you notice a lot of these are just like fives. They're not really deep oil, and so it's still going to be very concentrated in the areas where it was originally, but it's not going to be it's not going to be like inaccessible for some countries, especially if you're smaller or something like this. Um, and then we don't want to exactly leave a track record of this field would have been accessible in 1880, etc. in our history books whenever we discover new resources. So best guesstimates have been used, and balance between historical and semi-balanced gameplay has to be found. Okay, so all this seems reasonable. Um, and then, while we're no means done with oil, this is the first step to balancing and has been sent off to QA to run tests and gather feedback. I've got plenty of possibilities to look into, but I want to make iterative changes perfect instead of altering many things at once and not seeing their full impact. So this is actually just like a bit of a tangent, but like this is a good way of going about things where in order to isolate a variable you change one thing and then you just like you know what its effective is and then you can adjust on top of that. Things I'm looking for in the future includes gating some oil reserve potential behind tech to make it, I would love this, to make it where deposits that were not found until modern days are harder for the player to get but still possible. This actually seems like something that should be in the game. If oil supply is still too short, looking into adding more variation of production methods of balancing input-output of these factories. This seems fair to me, where you could start using like way more engines to get a little bit more oil when like the oil prices start to like come up to like near shortage levels, where it's not efficient to do this unless you have really cheap engines or something like this, and giving whale oil industry more a kick in the gear in the early stages of the game. I don't know about this, but okay. So now he's going to talk about rubber. While it's not as much a bottleneck of the world's oil supply, rubber is not found to be plentiful enough to meet the world's demand at current. Yeah, I'm having a lot of trouble in my games. This is the current rubber discoverables, and I have a lot of trouble in game with this, especially if you get weirdly cut off in the Congo. People kind of underproduce it, although I didn't realize there's so much rubber in just every Indonesian island, and also like here, so maybe the Congo is not the be all end all I've thought it to be. But we want to make AI better at extracting and utilizing resources and get perfect. So this is something that I really struggle with. Is I feel like you actually have to own the land yourself. You can't just import it because the AI doesn't. They just underbuild the extraction of these resources. And so here are the changes, and notice the difference. Your eyes aren't deceiving you. The two maps are the same. Yeah. So this one is exactly the same. And what is he going to change? Vertical margins. We have been changed rubber at vertical margins as opposed to horizontal margins. While I could have upped the world's supply of rubber, looking at the later game saves I found, it was population issues which were preventing the resource from meeting demands. That's interesting. That's not my experience in the game. I found people just migrate to the rubber. But okay. Huh. That's not the issue. Oh, it just means population in terms of consumption, and like you're building telephones and stuff with rubber, and like domestic consumption of rubber goods is high. I'm not sure what this means exactly. I certainly haven't had difficulty employing rubber extraction. So what I did instead was add a new rubber PM to the rubber plantations. Perfect. Giving them automatic irrigation system like that of other plantations. This building shares in relation to name only to symbolize later efforts to modernize plantations, not fully and not be fully rainfall dependent. This would help increase the productivity of buildings already in the game. So each rubber plantation is going to produce more rubber, which helps if the problem is, as this like picture suggests, not being able to reach full employment. And I assume it produces more rubber and takes more engines. Perfect. And also uses a little bit less labor actually. Uses 100 less laborers in total, or 100 less workers. Items. So this seems nice. I really wish that they changed the colonization mechanic, which makes the scramble for Africa like kind of annoying. In that right now, what happens is you can trigger the uprisings, and then you get the whole territory, and so like you have to. Actually, maybe I think it's okay, but what happens now is when you're scrambling for Africa, if someone has an uprising, they're going to get the entire state if you don't do anything about it. So you have to join on the enemy side and try and prevent them from like annexing all of the Congo. So maybe I actually really like this system, but like it seems, I don't know, it seems unbalanced because like sometimes a country will just like you're just trying to get in there and then they just get a whole bunch of uprisings in a row and then you're just cut off from the Congo. But I guess it's the scramble for Africa. Maybe it's okay. Items I'm looking to include in the future include adding more rubber potentials to the game if this PM is not enough. Fair. Potential synthetic rubber in the late game. Would love this. The current synthetic factories, like, they seem to be really unproductive at producing silk. And maybe I just don't have enough demand for silk in the games I'm playing. But a lot of them, it's better just to keep them on dyes only, which I'm or in terms of profitability, it seems better to keep on dyes only. Okay. State traits for a specific area of the world where that would be best suited to its cultivation to help throughput. I would also love this. What I've really noticed in my game, or like something that kind of annoyed me, was like the U.S. has a bunch of like unique throughput bonuses to a ton of its provinces, and like other places don't have too much. And it's like, okay. It seems like that's something they'll get into more later on. Um, Two resource changes have been put into 1.1 among other things, and are currently being vetted for balance and functionality by QA team. Perfect. Like right now, it seems like that the game is much more tested and balanced for like the first 50 years instead of the back 50 years, and like one of the problems is just running out of these stuff. What am I doing while this is being vetted? Why am I breaking ground into future balance changes is 1.2? As I stated elsewhere on the forums, I am looking into arable land. Okay, interesting. Balance of the game and making changes to them. I would love for arable land to actually increase with tech somehow, because currently, like hybrid or in the late game, I'm also running out of arable land as well. Is a bit of a problem. Since these changes have the potential to upend the world economy, fair enough. I'm getting this branch settled early, so we have as much time on our end to iterate on its balance. I will be also taking feedback. Blah blah blah, blah blah blah. All right, so this is the big stuff from 1.1 that they have not talked about. The previous dev diary is that they're just increasing oil and rubber, and this ought to make the late game a lot more enjoyable to play, or this among other things ought to make the late game much more enjoyable to play. The other one being the hotfix, which made the game run a lot better. Anyways, if you like this video, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and have a good one.